At 3:47 a.m., every screen on Earth lit up at once. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was alone in the Jet Propulsion Laboratory's monitoring station when it happened. She'd been tracking routine satellite telemetry, fighting to stay awake with her third cup of coffee, when suddenly every frequency they monitored, every single one, spiked simultaneously. The probability of that happening naturally was so close to zero, it might as well have been impossible. Then the message appeared. Not on one screen, on all of them. The same text, rendered in clean, emotionless letters that somehow managed to feel colder than the 2 a.m. California air seeping through the building's old ventilation system. Humanity. In 365 days, we will assume control of Earth. Resistance is futile. Hostility will be met with appropriate force. Sarah's hand froze halfway to her keyboard. She read it again. Then again. Her scientific mind immediately started running through explanations. System compromise, coordinated hack, elaborate prank by one of the grad students. But before she could even reach for the phone to call security, her cell phone buzzed in her pocket. The same message. Then her smartwatch. Then she heard screaming from down the hall. Within 6 minutes, every connected device on the planet had received the same message. Phones in Tokyo, digital billboards in Times Square, the entertainment system on a United Airlines flight somewhere over the Atlantic, the smart refrigerator in a suburban home in Kansas City. Everything. Sarah would later learn that a man in Mumbai had been proposed to when his girlfriend's engagement ring notification was replaced by the message. A child in São Paulo had been watching cartoons when her tablet screen went dark and displayed those same words. The President of the United States had been in a secure bunker for a routine drill when every screen in the Situation Room showed nothing but that message. 6 minutes to reach 8 billion people. That was the moment humanity realized it wasn't alone. The panic was immediate and absolute. Markets crashed before they could even open. 3 governments fell in the first week. Doomsday cults that had been predicting this for decades suddenly found themselves overwhelmed with new members. Gun stores in Texas sold out in hours. In Los Angeles, people abandoned their cars on the freeway and just started walking, though no one could quite explain where they thought they were going. Sarah didn't sleep for 3 days. None of them did at JPL. They analyzed the signal from every possible angle, trying to find its source, trying to understand how it had bypassed every security protocol humanity had ever devised. The encryption alone should have been impossible. It had adapted to every device simultaneously, as if it understood every programming language, every operating system, every hardware configuration that humans had ever created. It's like it read our entire technological history in an instant, muttered Dr. James Park, one of the senior cryptographers, his eyes bloodshot from staring at code. And then just spoke to all of it at once. The United Nations convened an emergency session. World leaders argued over whether it was a hoax, a psychological operation by some rogue nation, or actual extraterrestrial contact. The debate was fierce and desperate. Then the second message arrived. 48 hours after the first one, screens flickered again. This time, the message was shorter. We anticipated your disbelief. A demonstration will occur in 48 hours. Observe. That was it. No explanation, no demands, just a promise. NASA, NORAD, and every space agency on Earth went into overdrive. If something was coming, they would see it. They would stop it. They had to. Except they couldn't. The object appeared without warning, already past the orbit of the moon, traveling at a speed that should have torn it apart from atmospheric friction alone. It was roughly the size of a school bus, perfectly spherical, and it reflected no light whatsoever. They could only track it by the way it bent the light around it, like a hole in space itself. Every nation with military satellites trained their weapons on it. The United States alone fired 6 interceptor missiles. Russia fired 4. China fired 3. None of them worked. The missiles simply shut down mid-flight, their guidance systems going dark, their fuel somehow ceasing to combust. They fell harmlessly into the ocean. The orbital weapons platforms that were never supposed to exist, the ones every nation swore they didn't have, fired their directed energy weapons. Every single beam missed. Not by much, just enough. As if something was gently, effortlessly pushing the trajectory aside at the last possible moment, the way you might brush away a fly. The object entered Earth's atmosphere over the Mediterranean, passed over Egypt, and descended toward the Sahara Desert. Sarah watched it happen live from the emergency command center they'd set up at JPL. Satellite feeds from 8 different countries showed the same thing. The sphere dropping through the sky like a stone through water. No heat signature, no sonic boom, no sign that physics applied to it the way it should. It hit the ground in the most remote part of the Sahara at exactly 3:47 a.m., Greenwich Mean Time, exactly 48 hours after the first message. The world held its breath. There was no explosion. No mushroom cloud. No shockwave. Instead, for 30 seconds, there was nothing. The satellite feeds showed nothing but sand and darkness. Then the desert started to change. It began at the impact point and spread outward in a perfect circle, moving at exactly 100 meters per second. The sand didn't scatter or burn. It transformed, crystallized. The entire desert floor turned into glass. Not regular glass, but something that glowed with an internal blue light, etched with geometric patterns so complex that looking at them made Sarah's eyes hurt. The transformation spread for exactly 15 kilometers in every direction. Then it stopped. Not gradually, not with a fade or a flicker. It just stopped, the line between transformed and untransformed sand so precise you could have measured it with a ruler. Dawn broke over the Sahara an hour later, and the first news helicopters arrived to find something that looked like the floor of an alien cathedral. The glass was perfectly smooth, perfectly clear, and the patterns inside it shifted and moved when you looked at them from different angles, creating the illusion of depth that went down forever. Scientists reached the site within 12 hours. Sarah was on the first plane, along with teams from NASA, the European Space Agency, and a dozen universities. The glass was real. Samples could be taken, though it took diamond-tipped drills to do it. The patterns were real, though no one could figure out what they meant or how they'd been created. The temperature of the glass was exactly 20 degrees Celsius, and it stayed that way regardless of the desert heat. Touch it, and it felt neither warm nor cold. Just neutral. But here was the thing that kept Sarah awake for the next month straight. The weapon had fixed something. Deep ground penetrating radar showed that the Sahara sat on top of a massive geological fault line that had been building pressure for millennia. Seismologists had known about it but couldn't do anything. It was too deep, too big, too dangerous to even attempt to relieve the pressure. The best estimates said it would rupture within 5 to 10 years, causing earthquakes that would devastate North Africa and send tsunamis across the Mediterranean. The crystallization had stabilized it, completely. The fault line was now locked in place by a lattice of that alien glass that extended down 40 kilometers into the Earth's crust. They hadn't attacked humanity. They'd saved a chunk of the planet from a disaster that would have killed millions. The question was, why? Dr. Elena Reeves, a geologist from Stanford, was the one who found the pattern. She'd been analyzing seismic data from around the world when she noticed it. "The Yellowstone supervolcano," she said at the Emergency Scientific Summit 3 weeks after the demonstration. "The Cascadia subduction zone, the San Andreas fault, the Indonesian volcanic arc. They're all building toward critical failure. Not in a million years, in our lifetimes." She pulled up a map of the world, with red zones marked across it. Earth's crust is becoming unstable. We've known about climate change, about ocean acidification, about deforestation. But this is deeper. The planet itself is sick. We've got maybe 20 years before we start seeing cascade failures. 30 at the most. The room went silent. "They're not conquering us," Elena said quietly. "They're taking over a planet that's already dying." The narrative began to shift. Fear mixed with something more complicated. Desperate hope. Maybe they weren't conquerors. Maybe they were gardeners, arriving to tend a dying world. Maybe they would save humanity from itself. Religious leaders called for peace, for acceptance. The Pope gave a speech about stewardship and humility. The Dalai Lama spoke of karma and cosmic balance. Imams and rabbis and priests all began preaching the same message. Perhaps this was a gift, not a curse. And for the first time in human history, the governments of Earth truly unified. They called it the Unified Earth Alliance. Every nation signed, even North Korea, even the handful of isolated states that had spent decades refusing to cooperate with the international community. Because what choice did they have? The UEA's first act was to integrate every defense system on the planet. American satellites networked with Russian ones. Chinese AI defense systems shared data with European ones. Israeli missile defense coordinated with Iranian early warning systems. Everything connected, everything centralized. The logic was simple. If they were coming, humanity needed to speak with one voice, act with one will. Sarah was appointed to the UEA Science Council. So was Elena. They worked 20-hour days, analyzing the Sahara glass, trying to reverse engineer even a fraction of the technology that had created it. They made no progress whatsoever. It's like trying to understand a smartphone when your only reference is a stone axe, Sarah admitted to Elena over a dinner neither of them had time to eat properly. We can see what it does. We just have no idea how. Maybe that's the point, Elena said, pushing rice around her plate. Maybe they want us to know we're outclassed. 3 months passed, then 6. The deadline crept closer, and the world held its breath. That's when Marcus Chen found the hidden message. Marcus was 23 years old, a hacktivist who'd spent his teenage years breaking into corporate databases to expose corruption. He'd been trying to decrypt the original signal, not out of any official capacity, but because he was curious and talented and couldn't leave a puzzle unsolved. He found it buried in the carrier wave of the signal itself, hidden under 17 layers of encryption that used mathematical principles that shouldn't have existed. The message was short. Harvest protocol initiated. Return of creators authorized. Marcus published it on every platform he could find, before any government could stop him. Within hours, it had been viewed 1 billion times. The word harvest changed everything. Panic returned, worse than before. Harvest meant crops. Harvest meant collection. Harvest meant they weren't gardeners coming to tend the earth. They were farmers coming to reap what they'd sown. The UEA tried to suppress the message, called it a hoax, even arrested Marcus. But the damage was done. The fragile unity began to crack. That's when the excavation team in Antarctica made their discovery. They'd been drilling through 2 miles of ice, following a magnetic anomaly that had appeared on scans only after the Sahara demonstration. When they broke through, they found a chamber. It wasn't natural. The walls were smooth, carved from the bedrock with the same impossible precision as the Sahara glass. And in the center of the chamber stood a monument. It was 30 feet tall, made of a black material that absorbed light completely, covered in the same geometric patterns as the desert glass. And at its base was a control panel with symbols that seemed to shift and change as you looked at them. Dr. David Morrison, a linguist specializing in dead languages, was the one who figured out how to activate it. The monument didn't speak. It showed. Holographic images filled the chamber, displaying Earth as it had been 65 million years ago. Then the images fast-forwarded, showing the planet's evolution, the rise and fall of species, the slow march of geological time. Then it showed something that made Sarah's blood run cold. Human evolution, compressed into a minute of footage. But it wasn't natural. The images showed clear intervention, genetic markers being altered, evolutionary paths being guided, the human brain being enhanced far faster than natural selection would have allowed. "We were created," Elena whispered, watching the display. "Not by God, by them." The monument played one final message, this one in perfect English that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Earth, Experimental Cultivation Site 773. Species, Homo sapiens variant C. Status, maturation complete. Harvest window, approaching. Interference by preservationist faction noted but insufficient to halt protocol. The hologram showed two factions of aliens, the architects, who had seeded and modified humanity, and the preservers, who had tried to interfere, to give humanity a chance to develop naturally. The preservers had failed. But they'd done enough to delay the harvest by millennia, giving humanity time to become something more than just another crop. They can't interfere now, Morrison said, reading the symbols. Some kind of treaty or law. They can observe, but they can't act. So we're on our own, Sarah said. The monument went dark. The world learned the truth within hours. This time the UEA didn't even try to suppress it. What was the point? Humanity was an experiment, a crop, and the farmers were coming to collect. But humanity had one advantage. Desperation breeds innovation. The quantum disruption device was Dr. Yuki Tanaka's brainchild. She'd been working on it in secret at a research facility in Japan, funded by a coalition of nations that had never quite trusted the UEA's peaceful approach. The principle was elegant. Create a quantum field that would collapse all advanced technological functions within its range. It would shut down the alien ships, their weapons, their technology. It would also shut down everything else. Every computer, every power grid, every medical device, every piece of technology more advanced than a mechanical clock. Millions would die within days. Everyone depended on life support, on dialysis, on ventilators. Billions would die within months as supply chains collapsed, as food distribution failed, as clean water became impossible to guarantee. But humanity would survive. Diminished, set back centuries, but alive and free. The debate tore the UEA apart. Sarah argued against it. It's suicide. We'd be destroying ourselves to spite them. Better dead than harvested, countered General Patricia Hayes, one of the device's strongest supporters. Better free in ruins than slaves to whatever they want to use us for. The vote was scheduled for 2 weeks before the deadline. They never got to take it, because 3 days before the vote, the ships arrived. They appeared in orbit without warning, just like the probe had, as if they'd simply decided to exist in that location, and reality had agreed. There were 9 of them, each one the size of Manhattan, perfect spheres of that same light-absorbing black material. They didn't attack. They didn't communicate. They just waited, hovering in geosynchronous orbit above the world's major cities: New York, London, Beijing, Moscow, Mumbai, São Paulo, Lagos, Sydney, Tokyo. 9 ships, 9 cities. 3 billion people directly underneath them. Then, on the 365th day, exactly 1 year after the first message, people started falling asleep. Not everyone. Just some people. Seemingly at random. They were going about their normal lives, eating breakfast, walking to work, playing with their children, and then they just stopped. Eyes closed, breathing steady, heartbeat normal, but completely unconscious. No amount of stimulation could wake them. Not shouts, not pain, not anything. Within 6 hours, 50 million people worldwide had fallen into the sleep. Doctors were baffled. The sleepers were alive by every medical definition, but their brain activity was strange. Patterns that looked almost like they were dreaming, but too organized, too structured. They're being scanned, Sarah realized, looking at the EEG readouts. The ships are reading their minds. The harvest had begun. That's when the final message from the preservers arrived. It came through the Antarctic monument, transmitted to every device still functional on Earth. The test was never military. Civilizations that choose mutual destruction are filtered. Those that find another path are rare. You have a third option. The message displayed 4 names: Sarah Mitchell, Marcus Chen, Elena Reeves, David Morrison. 4 volunteers. Connect to the Architect Network, not to attack, to show them who you are, what you've become. They judge based on data. Show them the data they can't quantify. Sarah stared at her name on the screen, then looked at Elena, who'd been reading the same message. It's a trap, General Hayes said immediately. They'll harvest you and learn everything we know. Or it's a chance, Marcus said. He'd been released from detention when the ships arrived. Seemed pointless to keep him locked up when the world was ending. The preservers have been trying to help us. Why start lying now? Because we don't know what their agenda is, Hayes countered. We know what the architect's agenda is, David Morrison said quietly. The linguist had barely spoken since Antarctica. Harvest. Use us for whatever purpose they designed us for. At least this is a chance. Sarah looked at the EEG readouts again, at the 50 million people sleeping, their minds being read and cataloged and judged. I'll do it, she said. So will I, Elena added. Marcus nodded. Yeah, I'm in. Morrison sighed. Someone needs to make sure the rest of you don't mess up the translation. The interface was at the Antarctic Monument. They had to hurry. The sleep was spreading. 1 million new cases every hour. The 4 of them stood before the monument as it activated, extending 4 crystalline tendrils that looked disturbingly organic. Just so we're clear, Marcus said, eyeing the tendril approaching his head. If this kills us, I'm haunting all of you. Deal, Sarah said, and then the tendril touched her temple, and the world disappeared. She was everywhere and nowhere, floating in a vast network of consciousness that was utterly alien and somehow familiar. She could feel the architects, not as individuals but as a collective mind, vast and cold and utterly logical. And she could feel them judging humanity, weighing it against some criteria she couldn't quite grasp. But she could also feel Marcus beside her, his quick, clever mind darting through the network, understanding the technology in ways even he couldn't have explained. And Elena, her deep connection to Earth itself, to geological time and planetary processes. And Morrison, translating, bridging, finding ways to make human concepts comprehensible to minds that had never known individual identity. Show them, the preserver voice echoed. It wasn't really a voice, more like a concept given shape. Show them what you've become. Sarah didn't know how to do that. She was a scientist. She dealt in data, in measurable phenomena. But then she remembered. She thought of the Challenger disaster, of watching engineers weep over a failure that killed 7 people they'd never met. She thought of the International Space Station, of Russian and American astronauts sharing meals above a world where their nations were enemies. She thought of the Mars rovers, of scientists throwing parties when robots on another planet worked correctly, celebrating machines as if they were beloved pets. Elena showed them art, not the concept of art, but the actual feeling of standing before the Sistine Chapel, of listening to Beethoven's Ninth, of reading Whitman under a tree. The creation of beauty without purpose, without survival value, just because it mattered to create it. Marcus showed them suffering, and what humans did with it. Holocaust survivors who became peace activists, former slaves who became abolitionists, people who endured horror and chose not to inflict it on others. The choice to break cycles rather than continue them. Morrison showed them language itself, not as data transmission, but as poetry, as jokes, as metaphor. The ability to say, love is a rose, and have everyone understand both the truth and the impossibility of that statement. Together they showed humanity's greatest trick, the ability to hold a weapon of total destruction and choose not to use it. Because that quantum disruption device existed. It was armed. It was ready. Humanity could have activated it the moment the ships arrived, and they hadn't. they'd chosen to try this instead. In the architect network, Sarah felt something shift. The vast, cold logic encountering something it hadn't predicted. Not perfection. Humanity was deeply, obviously flawed. But the capacity to be better than their design, to choose mercy when evolution had programmed them for survival, to create meaning in a universe that offered none. The judgment took 17 hours. Sarah, Marcus, Elena, and Morrison remained connected the entire time, aware of the debate raging through the architect collective. It wasn't unanimous. It wasn't even close. But eventually, consensus formed. The four of them collapsed when the tendrils retracted, gasping for air, their minds reeling from having touched something so vast. Sarah's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen with eyes that barely focused. One message. Test complete. Sanctuary status granted. Harvest aborted. Above the 9 cities, the ships began to move. Not attacking. Rising. Accelerating. Within minutes they were gone, vanishing into the depths of space as silently as they'd arrived. And everywhere on Earth the sleepers woke up. The world celebrated. Streets filled with people crying, laughing, hugging strangers. The UEA declared it a global holiday. Churches held services of Thanksgiving. Scientists published papers trying to understand what had happened. But Sarah noticed something in the weeks that followed. All the alien technology was gone. The Sahara glass had vanished overnight, leaving only normal sand. The Antarctic monument was just an empty chamber carved in rock. Every sample they'd collected, every piece of data they'd gathered, all of it corrupted or simply missing. It was as if the architects had erased every trace of their presence, almost every trace. Deep ground radar showed that the geological stabilization remained. The fault lines were still locked in place. The planet was still saved from the cascade failures that Elena had predicted. They'd fixed Earth. Then they'd left. The official narrative, the one the UEA promoted, was simple. Humanity had faced a test and passed. We'd proven ourselves worthy of survival. The alien threat was over. But Sarah knew better. 5 years later, she stood in the Nevada desert at a facility that officially didn't exist. Around her, 10,000 people slept in cryogenic pods, carefully selected representatives of human diversity. Scientists, artists, engineers, teachers, doctors. A backup, just in case, because the preservers had sent one final message, encrypted so deeply that it took 3 years to decode. You were graded on a curve. They found you interesting. They did not find you safe. Sarah looked up at the stars, thinking about the vote that had decided humanity's fate. The architects had never told them the count. Never revealed how close it had been. Maybe it had been unanimous in their favor. Or maybe it had been decided by a single vote. The quantum disruption device still existed, hidden and maintained. The UEA still met regularly, still coordinated Earth's defenses, still prepared, because they all knew the truth, even if they didn't say it out loud. The test hadn't been about whether humanity deserved to survive. It had been about whether humanity was worth the effort of harvesting right now. And right now implied a future tense. Sarah went home that night to her apartment in Pasadena, poured herself a drink, and looked at the photo on her desk. Her team from the JPL control room, taken the day before the first message. Back when the stars were full of possibility instead of judgment. Her phone buzzed. A message from Marcus, who'd become the UEA's head of cybersecurity. Another signal anomaly. Probably nothing, but I'm checking it anyway. Probably nothing. That's what she'd thought 5 years ago, when all the frequencies spiked at once. Sarah set down her drink and opened her laptop, because maybe the test was over. Or maybe they were just in the intermission, and the real exam hadn't started yet. Outside her window, the stars shone cold and distant and utterly indifferent. Somewhere out there, the architects were watching, and somewhere, the preservers were hoping humanity would prove them right. The question was, which group would be disappointed? Sarah didn't know. But she knew that if the ships came back, humanity would be ready. Not with weapons, but with the same thing they'd shown the first time. The stubborn, illogical, beautiful choice to be better than they were designed to be. Even if it killed them. Especially if it killed them. Because that was the thing the architects had never quite understood about their experiment. Humanity's greatest survival trait wasn't intelligence or adaptability or tool use. It was spite. The sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept extinction gracefully. Sarah smiled at that thought, finished her drink, and got to work. Because 365 days from now, or 365 years, if those ships came back, humanity would have an answer ready. And it wouldn't be the one the architects expected.
So, that's the end of this story, but there are plenty of other great ones right here. Before you go, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that little bell.